Michael, we're now into the swing of things in the regular season. Week 2 is here, and we got a fun one tonight, but we got to talk about what we saw on Monday night before we get into anything Week 2 related.
I mean, I'm still in shock. I'm still recovering from that. I mean, you know, it's to me, there's so many ways we can go on this, but I think the first way to go is the fact that it was premeditated. And here's where I'm coming on this one. Mm-hmm. I have always had a problem, and I've said it on this podcast before, about football coaches not copying basketball coaches in timeout settings. So, for example, when the Super Bowl occurred and the Bengals got the ball back, I've said on my prior podcast with Adnan after that game, I said, look, if I were Zach Taylor, I would have called my offensive staff together. I would have said, look, I want my best players on the field. Here are the 8 plays we're going to run. Make sure everybody knows what we're doing. All we got to do is get in makeable field goal range, and we'll get this game in overtime. We might score a touchdown. Okay. So that didn't happen. Obviously, Samjay Perrine is still eating, running on the field on the 3rd and 1. Okay, so to me, this game really was a situation for Nathaniel Hackett to practice that exact thing. Because let's go through it. Femi. Mm-hmm. Seattle got 5 first downs in the second half, okay? They got 3 on the first drive that they had. They only gained 26 yards, 10 by penalties, and they punted. The next time they've got the ball, they got 2 first downs, and they punted. They only had the ball. Denver had the ball for 20 minutes in the second half, and were only down by 4 points. So, to me, and they moved the ball up and down the field. We know that. So I thought Hackett should have called his offensive coaches together and said, look, fellas, we have to play our best players. We got to put our best guys on the field. We're going for it on 4th down until we get into makeable field goal range. Like this premeditated, if we get to the 46, we're going to kick it. Like, whatever happened to common sense? Like, common sense is that's a hard kick to make. That's common sense, right?
100%. And I think, watching it live, I couldn't believe it. I actually went back because I was doing our show here at VSiN during it, so I didn't have any of the audio. I went back home and I watched the broadcast just to see what Joe Buck and Troy Aikman said. And looking at Troy Aikman's face as they were in that timeout there, because I think they all thought that, all right, they're going to go on the field and run a play on 4th and 5. And you can kind of see the moment where he sees Russell Wilson still hanging out on the sidelines. He sees McManus starting to run out onto the field. He looked as confused as anybody. We were all confused that maybe they were trying to freak the Seahawks out or something. It didn't make any sense, given the fact that they had 3 timeouts. That's the part that I can't get over.
Right. Well, I mean, to me, the reality of it was, as I sat there and Bella's snoring in my ear, and I'm watching the game alone, and when Russell went to the sideline, I said to Bella, they're kicking a field goal. I mean, and she grunted like, are you kidding me? And went back to sleep. But I said, I could tell they were kicking the field goal. Wilson took his helmet off immediately when he went to the sideline. Go watch it. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't know what Troy and Joe saw, but I saw it immediately from my seat 3,000 miles away on a delay. So, like, once I knew that, I'm like, what are we doing here? Like, there was no plan. Like, I'm going to keep using this word. There was no strategy involved. There was no strategy involved in this at all. And it was a complete miscalculation. And I think, to me, it goes back to an old adage that I've often said many, many times. The goal is to not get into field goal range. That's not the goal. The goal is to get in makeable field goal range, right? I don't give a shit if you have a great leg. Those kicks over 40 yards, they're harder to kick. You got wind, you got, all those things play into a factor. Pressure. You want to take it as far down as you can. I want to make sure that ball's going through the uprights. I don't want to have to hope. Don't ever confuse hope for a plan. So, to me, that whole game, that entire game was completely mismanaged. I feel bad for Nathaniel. Being the son of a head coach before, Paul Hackett was the head coach at USC. He was the head coach at Pitt. You would think that the game management stuff would come easy, but the reason I evaluate coordinators and the reason I evaluate head coaches in my power rankings was evidenced by Monday night. I'm sorry.
Does Russell Wilson shoulder any of the blame in that situation? Because he's in his 11th year. Should he have called timeout, or is it the coach has to make that decision? And if you're Wilson, you got to just go with what the coach says.
I mean, look, I thought Russell Wilson looked like the guy that we saw last year in Seattle. I think he led the National Football League in week 1 in yards after the catch on throws. What doesn't make it bad, it just means that the offense and the system were giving him a lot of yards. I think 260 of his 350 yards came from yards after the catch. Run with the football afterwards. So there were a lot of easy throws for him. He never escaped. When a defensive lineman almost caught him from behind, and he threw the ball away, that told me he can't really move. Now, look, last year he had one game-winning drive in the games he started. Which is way down. He's had 30% of Russell Wilson's wins in his career have been in fourth quarter comebacks. That's why he has always been a bettor's nightmare. I mean, a bettor's nightmare. That's why he carried a lot of points in Vinny and all the guys who handicap teams, because he had 30% of his wins in Seattle, Femi, are from in the fourth quarter comeback. Think about that. That's a remarkable number, right?
Yeah.
But yet on that field, I didn't fear him. I saw a pedestrian-type player, a guy that can't really move out of the way, that's going to just didn't really accept it. Now his QBR rating was great. Well, that's great, because what does that mean? They didn't win the game. At some point, the QBR, did you do enough to help your team win? The answer is no. You had the ball 20 minutes in the second half, right? You moved it up and down the field. You went for it on 4th and 1 inside the 1, and you turned the ball over twice inside the 1. I mean, that's your own fault. That's your own fault. You're watching the same game I'm watching. Seattle was never moving the ball in the second half. They were never moving the ball.
As much as Seattle gets the praise for winning the football game, they were bad in that second half offensively. And even defensively, Denver was moving the ball up and down the field. They just couldn't execute inside the 5-yard line, like you talked about, the 3 fumbles at the goal line, 1 on 4th down and 1 on 3rd and goal. So, yeah, this Denver team, I don't know if it's time to panic just yet, because I think offensively they still were able to make some big plays. They average almost 7 yards per play, but the defenses are going to get a little bit harder than what they see later on this season versus Seattle, that defense being a little bit younger and still early on in their process with Pete Carroll and that coaching staff.
I worry about Seattle's defense, man.
Yeah, they were getting carved up.
They were getting carved up on basic West Coast offense plays. And can I ask you a question?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you're watching the game. You're watching Melvin Gordon. You're watching Williams. Who do you want on the field all the time?
Oh, Williams.
It's not even close, right?
Yeah, it's Williams.
Like, why would I would integrate Gordon in the games in the first and second quarter, maybe, and a little bit there, but from the middle of the third all the way to the end of the game, it's Williams' team. To me, it's Williams' team. He's got to be the guy. Like, this is ridiculous that he's not the guy. Like, I don't understand it. I don't know if you noticed, I saw a lot of frustration in the Denver receivers towards Wilson. I felt like they were like, look, I'm open. I'm not getting the ball. He was taking too many easy throws. Tell me a hard throw he made in the game, Femi.
A lot of them guys were running wide open.
Wide ass open. Not even open. Wide ass open.
And I wonder how much of it is, because I remember I read in Peter King's column about Russell Wilson talking to Nathaniel Hackett about trying to get the ball out of his hands quicker, because that's been the knock on Russell Wilson throughout his career, even when he was younger, of him holding onto the ball too long, making his offensive line look bad. I know people in the Pacific Northwest, they talk about that a little bit. It was Wilson trying too hard to get the ball out of his hands quickly, because in the second half was when we saw him start to actually target some of those receivers. But in the first half, Javonte Williams was targeted 12 times, 11 receptions for 65 yards. And some of them were explosive plays in the screen game, but he really looked like he was making a concerted effort to try to get the ball out of his hands.
Yeah, it looked like, that, and everybody thinks that's a wonderful thing, but sometimes, as we know, you got to get the ball. You got to hold the ball for a tad longer just to make the throw. Mm-hmm. You got to have to take a hit. I think it's been evidenced by he doesn't want to run with it anymore, Femi. He rushed for 183 yards last year. He doesn't want to move around. Look, and that's normal for most quarterbacks, right? They get hit so much, it becomes like in the game, Jacksonville versus Washington. Lawrence, for his ability to keep his eye level down after taking the beating that he took, is remarkable. It takes a lot of courage to get the shit kicked out of you and still keep your eye level up, like Joe Burrow has had to do, and even had to do this past Sunday.
Thanks for watching the GM Shuffle with Michael Lombardi. And for more videos like this, make sure to subscribe to VSiN Live and the GM Shuffle podcast with Michael Lombardi, presented by DraftKings and VSiN, wherever you get your podcasts.